Hi everyone, welcome to the January 14th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona, joined by my usual co-host Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're looking ahead to Saturday's card at Santa Anita. It is their California Cup Day. It's one of these days where used to be the Sunshine Millions, I believe, Craig, where Gulfstream would run Florida and California-bred races. They'd split them between California and Florida. That's kind of broken down over the years, but now Santa Anita runs their California Cup Day. We've got some Florida-bred races at Gulfstream Park if you want to check those out, but we're going to focus on Santa Anita and specifically their late pick six, their Rainbow Six, actually, races 5 through 10. It is a mandatory payout on Saturday. This usually is a jackpot-style wager, not the kind of wager Craig and I would usually get involved in, but when they do have these mandatory payout days, you want to pay attention because you could typically get that takeout eliminated. That's a big issue with those jackpot wagers. So we're going to talk about that pick six sequence, beginning with a maiden claiming race, but there are some stakes for the California breds within it. Craig, some big fields for California. You do get those with the California breds sometimes, but as I was going through this sequence, I didn't find there were that many prices I could make a case for, so it's the kind of sequence where you might want to narrow things down a little bit.
Yeah, I've got a couple price horses I'm going to throw in, but none that I actually, would make a top pick or anything like that. I'm sure we'll get into it more. It's funny you brought up the Sunshine Millions and the California Cup, because as I was looking at these races, I think one of them's named the Cal Cup Sprint, and another one's the Sunshine Millions Oak. So I was a little confused what was going on, but at the end of the day, they're just some nice state-bred stakes races, and I think a couple of them offer some decent betting opportunities.
Yeah, it feels like some of these races are relics from the past, but these races are all for California breds. I believe in the past they were split with Florida breds participating in California, California breds going to Florida. It was an interesting concept, I think, that Frank Stronach came up with, but that's kind of broken down over the years. But these races for the California breds have come up somewhat interesting. We know a lot of these horses that are competing on this day from their participation in some open company graded stakes races. We'll get to some of those bigger names later on, but we don't really start off with too many big names, Craig. As the first leg of this pick six sequence. Race 5 is a Cal-bred maiden claiming event for the newly turned 3-year-olds. $50,000 down to $45,000 tag. A lot of first-time starters in the mix, and I'm not going to blame anybody that wants to lean on the first-time starters here because those that have run are not really that appealing.
No, for sure. There's a couple horses that have run that have very low figures. The horse who is the second choice on the morning line has actually run 6 times and only mustered a couple of well-beaten thirds. So, yeah, it's hard for me to get too excited about this race. I mean, there's no way in the world I would bet this race on its own. But as part of the pick six sequence, I can see why you really don't have a choice. You have to start off. So, about all I have to say about it is, thankfully, California gives the option that you can watch the tote board, see where the money's going on the first-time starters, and personally, I would kind of concentrate on the top couple that take the money.
Yeah, that's a really good point. If you are playing this pick six sequence, you will get to see the tote board and who's taking money, which I do believe would be pretty important in this race. You've got some firsters going out for connections that aren't necessarily known for winning with a lot of first-time starters on this circuit, at least. I'll just briefly go through some of them, looking up the pedigrees and trainer patterns. I mean, the horses that are listed at the shortest prices on the morning line are Smiling Goodbye, the 5, as well as Big Gun, the 2, and Make Mine Wine. Interesting that the morning line maker made Smiling Goodbye the favorite. Dean Peterson, not a trainer that you really think of as winning with a ton of first-time starters, but if you look up the stats, actually, it's pretty clear that he sent out some live runners in this situation. I was looking it up specifically over the past 5 years with California breds in dirt sprints first time out. He's 5 for 17 with a $3.54 ROI. So definitely wins with horses like Smiling Goodbye. I saw one of this horse's workouts on XBTV. Certainly not a superstar, but looks like this horse can run a touch. So definitely a horse that I'd want to use. Not that I'm saying anything clever. He's pegged as the morning line favorite. And then Make Mine Wine's got a decent pedigree on the dam side. Big Gun, some of these progeny of Mr. Big have shown some precocity going out for Tim Yakteen, who hasn't had a lot of success with firsters recently, but over the past 5 years does okay, winning at 10%. So, I mean, like you said, Craig, watch the tote board, but I think there are some interesting angles on that 5-horse Smiling Goodbye.
Yeah, and the one thing I would say about these pick sixes with the carryovers is if you think it's going to be a fairly chalky sequence, don't be afraid to put in a small ticket, because there's a lot of people going to be putting in some very big tickets into this one. If it comes in, fairly with a lot of short prices, maybe one or two mid-price, you can get a really nice payoff, given that will be very little takeout given the carryover.
And if you're not loving this first leg of the sequence, you want to try to narrow it down, get through it as thinly as possible, and you're not successful, you could come right back in the pick 5 sequence, which begins in race 6. And Craig, that is the Unusual Heat Turf Classic, going 1.125 miles on the turf course at Santa Anita. And pretty intriguing field of runners. We'll talk about the pace a little bit, because I think that's a little bit murky. It's not exactly clear who's going to be on the front end. From a class perspective, I do think the outside drawn horse, Indian Peak, is the one to beat. He's run well against Graded Stakes Company on the turf, having done that in his last turf start in the Seabiscuit handicap back at the end of November. He, though, is a horse that likes to make one run from the back of the pack, so his chances are going to be dependent on how the pace shakes out on the front end.
Yeah, I do think he's clearly the horse to beat. Don't be fooled by the trainer change. I'm sure most of our listeners know it's just Peter Miller's taking a quasi-retirement or break or whatever it is, and is being replaced by Ruben Alvarado, but it's the same barn, so no real change there. And he's the horse who's run the best figures. Like you said, he ran a nice race in that Grade 2 Seabiscuit. He was beaten less than a length by the really good field pass. He's not a Cal-bred, but if he were, he'd probably be 1-5 in this field. So he's a little bit pace dependent, but he's been able to stay pretty close in races where the pace is less. He's won in some slow pace situations from off the pace, so I definitely do think he is the one horse to beat for sure.
Yeah, he's listed at 3-1 on the morning line. When I kind of went through this race, I figured he'd be somewhere in the 7-5 or lower range. He just looks like he has a significant class edge over this field. And some other horses that are listed at comparable prices, like the number 2 Margot's Boy and the number 3 Allegato, just don't nearly have the same credentials as Indian Peak. So, like I said, we'll see what kind of trip he gets from off the pace. He does have the ability to sit a little bit closer to make an early move, something that we saw from him at Del Mar over the summer when Flavien Prat was riding him on July 25th. So he's got a bit more versatility than that Seabiscuit might suggest, but he just looks like clearly the best horse coming into this race. Craig, I want to get your take on the other horse that I thought was interesting in here, and that's the number 5, Camino del Paraíso, the old-timer 9-year-old coming in from Northern California. I know that you could make the case that maybe he's lost a step recently. He was a loser as the favorite last time at Golden Gate on their synthetic track, but he's run some big races in Southern California on the turf in the past, sometimes at big prices against Graded Stakes Company, and if he can find some semblance of that old form, I think he's a major player in here.
Yeah, he's the only other horse I'm going to consider using. You mentioned Allegato, that 7-2 morning line. I'd be shocked if that horse goes off that low. I don't see anything in that horse's credentials. He's never gone this far, stretching out from 6 furlongs to 1.125 miles. I think the furthest he's ever run is 6.5, so I didn't get that one at all. But I think Camino del Paraíso, he's certainly got a shot. He's the logical other contender. He's the only one that's consistently run those kind of speed figures on the turf that would make him competitive with Indian Peak. He's got some tactical speed, and his last 2 races on the synthetic at Golden Gate aren't too bad. The figures are a little lower, but it's a different surface, and I think he's held his form well, even despite being 9 years old. So I wouldn't use him as an A type like I would Indian Peak, more of a B or C for me, but he's the only other one I'm using.
Yeah, I think that from a class standpoint, those are the 2 horses that you can make the soundest case for. The one other horse that I do want to mention is the number 1, Whooping Jay. He's listed at 6-1 on the morning line. I think that would be a fair price on him. Just an interesting horse for the reason that he was claimed for $100,000 last time, which is a lot of money, it seems, to pay for a horse like this. And the trainer has mediocre stats off the claim. I'm more concerned with the owner that claimed him, Rockingham Ranch and others. Very dangerous claiming out from the owner's standpoint. So that makes me want to take notice of this horse. And also, he's listed as the one that's on the early lead on the pace projector. Not that it's a pace that's predicted to favor one particular running style over another, but it's going to be interesting to see how the 3 inside drawn horses kind of sort themselves out towards the front end, even with that sprinter Allegato stretching out for the first time. But I could see Whooping Jay getting a little aggressive. He's been forwardly placed on the stretch out in the past. Don't love the 1.125 for him, but just think there are some interesting angles for maybe him being the one that outruns his odds.
Yeah, and his trainer's been hot. We have that in TimeformUS, and it's not always easy to get that hot designation, but he has been at this Santa Anita meet. As you point out, the pace projector has him on, not just on the lead, but on a clear early lead. So he could be dangerous. My one downside for him was what you mentioned, the 1.125. I really question if he wants to go that far. He's also a horse that's never really been on the lead, at least not in a very long time if he has. So, it's one of those cases the pace projector is a bit foggy because there's just a lot going on in this race. There's no real confirmed front runners. We have a few sprinters stretching out. So it's kind of going to come down to tactics. And I wouldn't be surprised if this horse was sent.
Let's move on to race 7. It is an optional claiming allowance event. Non-winners of one other than the allowance condition for the California breds, going 6 furlongs on the dirt course. And this is one where I think pace could have a big impact on the outcome. We had talked about this a little bit on the TimeformUS Pacecast earlier in the week, Craig. As I watch a lot of these California dirt races, I get the sense that on many days, there's not a ton of closing going on. You could say that especially about the 2-turn races. This, of course, is a 1-turn race going a sprint distance, but it doesn't seem like you want to be that far off the pace right now on the dirt at Santa Anita. So I'm bearing that in mind as I handicap this race. The favorite on the morning line is the number 4, Gates of Heaven, and he's just a horse that doesn't have that much early speed, one who's probably going to be coming from off the pace, coming off a victory last time out at Los Alamitos, but that was all the way back in December. I think there are some question marks with this horse, and I think when we talk about the morning lines for these races, we're seeing the morning line maker, and I don't disagree, but really lower the price of all of the horses that Flavian Pratt and John Velasquez are riding, because if you haven't been paying close attention, they are winning all of the races right now in Santa Anita. It's almost hard to believe that those two riders can continue winning at the 35 to 40% rate that they have been. That's just kind of off the charts, but understandably, the bettors are following suit and making their horses very low prices. I think this is a very wide open race, and I'd want to look for some value.
Yeah, I agree. It's an 8-horse field, and you won't see many races where every single horse in the field has run between a 95 and 100 on TimeformUS speed figures on the dirt in just their last 2 starts. And funny enough, the horse you mentioned, Gates of Heaven, is the one with the 95, which is kind of the lowest in the field, coming out of a starter allowance race at Los Al. So I'm with you on the skepticism. I'm not a big fan of his. I mentioned that I like a few price horses in here, and one that I can't pass up on this card is the 7-horse Alpine Thunder. He's coming out of what was a pretty quick race and actually is a crazy 30 to 1 or 20 to 1 on the morning line. I'd be shocked if we get that because I thought he ran well last time. He was a first-time gelding, so the jump in the speed figure that he showed is not all that uncommon. And he's also a newly turned 4-year-old, so he's got every right to improve. And not only that, he did it while up on a pretty fast pace. He was just a length off a 131 early pace figure, so he's definitely one that I have to use at a big price because I think he is going to be up near the front. That said, this is a race that I do think you have to spread out a little bit. Another one that I'm going to use for sure is a horse who's shown up right just off the lead on that pace projector. That's the 2-horse Scary Fast Smile. I think his form's been dirtied up a little bit. His speed figures fit just as every horse in this field does. But that last race at Los Al, I just kind of look at it like I've mentioned it many times on our shows. Some horses just don't run over that surface, and I think he's one of them. He's never ran particularly well over there. He's thrown in some real clunkers at short prices. So I'm going to give him a break on that one. And the time before, even though it was just a starter allowance race, it was open company, and I think it was a much tougher race. The horses in that race ran faster speed figures. He's another one that's going to be on the lead. He gets Tyler Bays. So those are the two I'm going to mainly focus on in here.
Yeah, look, I'm never going to talk you off a 20 to 1 shot with Alpine Thunder. If he's around that price, I mean, have at it. There's nobody in this race that I think is impossible. So if you want to take potentially the biggest price on the board, that's fine with me. It brings up an interesting question though, and how do you assess the Los Alamitos form compared to the horses with Del Mar and Santa Anita form, because sometimes we see some lesser competition at Los Alamitos. I've noticed, and it's not a critique of the TimeformUS speed figures, it's just across the board, any kind of speed figure. Sometimes when you're dealing with a circuit that there's a bit of a dip in quality, you sometimes see some inflated speed figures. The same thing that you would find to maybe a greater extent between like Finger Lakes and Belmont and Aqueduct in the wintertime. Those horses, sometimes you want to downgrade them a little bit. With Los Alamitos, I feel it's a similar situation. So I want to always be a little skeptical of horses that have only run big numbers at Los Al. And I find that especially more so with the horse that you mentioned, Craig, with the outside horse, the number 8 Crash Corrigan, who is coming out of the same race as Alpine Thunder, but he was the big favorite that day, going off at 4-5, couldn't quite get it done. If you just look at the running line, it might seem like Crash Corrigan did more running than actually was the case, because it looks like he may have run from off the pace, but he was actually passed from behind in the late stages by Rifey, who just ran right by him in the final eighth of a mile. So that was a race that completely fell apart. So I think if you are taking a horse out of this race, I'm fine with it being Alpine Thunder, who's going to be a much bigger price. I just think Crash Corrigan faced an extremely weak field 2-back, and then last time out, don't think he actually ran as well as it might seem at first glance. Maybe he's doing well right now for a barn that's been clicking at a high rate recently, but it is a barn, Lorenzo Ruiz, who does a lot more winning at Los Al than he does at the Santa Anita and Del Mar tracks. So I'm a little skeptical of that race that both of them are coming out of, but I would not argue with you taking the bigger price. I do like the other horse that you mentioned, Craig, the number 2 Scary Fast Smile, and he's the one that I'd want to lean on most heavily in this race. As I look at this pace projector, we'll see what we get from the number 6 Brace for Impact, who does have plenty of speed, but he's drawn to the outside. Joe Bravo, not always the most aggressive rider on him, so I'd like to see Tyler Bays really be committed to going from the inside on Scary Fast Smile. He's ridden this horse plenty of times before. He's been aggressive on him in the past, and I think when he rides him that way, he gets the best out of this horse. Maybe he's not as good as he was at the beginning of last year when he was posting some very big speed figures, but notice his biggest speed figures have come at Santa Anita, something you were getting at, Craig. Maybe he's just not a horse that likes Los Alamitos. Well, I think he's a horse that really does like Santa Anita, and sometimes this track can really play to horses with that kind of running style. So I would focus mostly on him as my main lean in this race. I don't have a big problem with a horse like the number 1 Admirably, who's listed as a short price as well, but I mean, he's coming off a victory now claimed by New Connections, same horses that we were mentioning off the claim in the first race, same trainer, I should say, but I feel like he's another one that doesn't have that much early speed and could be compromised if they don't go that quickly up front.
And one other horse that I have to use, even though he doesn't have that much speed, but he's only shown a few lengths back in the pace projector, is the 3 Rookie Mistake. And the reason, if you look through his past performances, he just is a triple-digit speed figure machine. Not huge speed figures, but he always hits them. And he's just actually taking a massive drop in class into this Cal-bred race. So it wouldn't surprise me if he's able to stay a little closer, and those 100-type speed figures could easily win a race like this. It's been a long time since he's been in just a Cal-bred maiden race. He's been in a lot of stakes races. He ran in a couple open company allowance races, but the last time he faced Cal-breds, he was able to win. So at 12-1 on the morning line, he's going to be on my tickets as well.
Yeah, I've got no problem with that horse either. I've got it marked out as one that I definitely want to use as a backup in this race, maybe even the primary backup for all the reasons that you mentioned, Craig. Before we wrap up, I should just note this is one of those optional claiming / allowance races, and the 2 horses that are entered for the $20,000 tag are the number 2 Scary Fast Smile and the number 3 Rookie Mistake. They both already cleared this condition, so to enter here, they have to be in for that tag. Some might take it as a negative that they're only being risked for $20,000, but as California breds, these races don't have quite as big purses, and I think it just speaks to where they realistically belong right now, and the slight drop in class, I believe, could work for both of these horses. So I just think that's something interesting to note if you want to analyze connection and intention with some of these horses. Let's move on to race 8. It's the middle leg of the pick 5 sequence, the fourth leg of that pick 6 sequence that began in race 5. This is the Sunshine Millions filly and mare turf sprint, going 6.5 furlongs down the hill. It should be noted they can run 6.5 furlong races on the regular turf course and down the hill these days, and it should be noted this one is down the hill. So not all of these horses have experience over that configuration, with over the past couple of years them having run a lot more races on the other turf course, the conventional turf course. So just bear that in mind as you're handicapping. Craig, we've got a big field signed on for this one, though I think on class and form there are two probable standouts. At least we'll see that it bet that way in the wagering, with the number 9 Warren Showtime and the number 12 Legs Galore. Very different running styles with these two horses, with one being a closer and one being a speed, but they both have solid form sprinting on the turf.
They do, but I actually prefer one a whole bunch more than the other, and that's a 9 Warren Showtime. She's actually won over this course before, and I like her running style. As you mentioned, we don't get to see a lot of these races down the hill. They used to be kind of a staple. Now it's more of a luxury to see one. They're not running very many of them. But Legs Galore is the kind of horse I used to love betting against in these spots. She's just a speed horse who prefers to sprint, the more traditional sprint. And I mean, it's not like speed never wins going down the hill, but it's certainly not the same advantage it is in the others. And Warren Showtime's exactly the kind of horse I look for. She's won on the course. She's had success at some longer distances coming from off the pace. So of those two favorites, she is the one that I'm going to lean on very heavily in here. I'll use a couple others, but Legs Galore won't be among them. If she beats me, so be it.
Yeah, I had a bit of a tougher time separating them than you did. I will say about Warren Showtime, she's typically, or she's primarily run longer distances during her career, but when she cut back to this 6.5 furlongs down the hill, her one try over it back on October 16th when she won that California Distaff Stakes, she was very impressive that day, beating today's rival Sedamar. That was a pretty slow pace, and she was coming from pretty far back in the pack to get up. She came with a really nice late run. I mean, she just flew home to the late stages of that race. So if that's an indication of how she handles this distance, she seems like she's going to be pretty dangerous in this race. The pace situation, a little bit murky. Once again, we've got some horses that could show speed, don't always use that kind of running style. The clear front runner in this field is the number 12 Legs Galore, and I don't think it's really that close. I'm not even sure it's as close as the pace projector indicates, for the reason that Legs Galore is coming out of a series of 2 turn races, when I believe if her pace projector and early pace rating had only been based off her sprint races earlier in her career, she'd be shown with much more of an advantage in that pace projector. They've obviously had to slow her down a little bit in the early going to negotiate some of those 2 turn races that she's tried recently at Santa Anita and Del Mar, but she did show a ton of early speed in those turf sprints, going 5 and 6 furlongs very early on. So we'll see how she handles the 6.5. I'm not totally against it. I respect your view about being skeptical of these horses in general, that show that form sprinting going shorter distances, but she has run well in almost all of her prior sprint efforts. So I think she's dangerous here, and I think she's clearly the fastest horse in the early going. So I had trouble splitting them, but there is a horse that I'm very interested in who's listed at a big price on the morning line. That's the number 11, Eddie's New Dream. This horse, to me, has run extremely well in all 3 of her turf races. There's an argument she should be undefeated on the turf, because when she lost that grade 3 autumn miss back at the end of October, that's one that's worth going back and watching. She just never had a chance to run for the entire stretch drive. She was held up in traffic around the far turn. You could see Mario Gutierrez had a ton of horse underneath him at the quarter pole, but could just never get this horse in the clear. Tried to go outside, went back inside, just basically standing up in the stirrups, not urging this horse for the entire final quarter mile of this race. And her surrounding turf races, I mean, she earned solid speed figures, speed figures around 110, TimeformUS on the turf. That's going to put her right in the mix here. And I know those were all going longer distances, but she's been successful sprinting on the dirt, so why can't she turn back to a 6.5 furlong sprint on the turf? I just think she's really interesting, and if she gets ignored in the wagering, she's definitely the kind of horse that I would want to use in any kind of multi-race sequence.
Yeah, she's the horse I have as my B. I have Warren Showtime as a lone A, and I have Eddie's New Dream as a lone B. for all the reasons you mentioned. She kind of has the profile of a horse who looks like she'll do fine cutting back to the hill. It's a kind I've always bet in the past, so I've got no problem with her. There are a couple others I wanted to mention just as C-types who are bigger prices as well. One of them is Nice Ice, who's 30-1 on the morning line. And that just goes back to, she's actually one that broke her maiden going down the hill. She's run some decent races on the turf. All her speed figures are in the triple digits, so there's no way I'm going to let her win and knock me out. And another one who kind of fits that profile is a horse who looks like she'll handle the hill pretty well, but hasn't really been given the chance, is the 4-horse Nardini. She's at 12-1 on the morning line. She has nice speed figures at longer distances, has also done well sprinting. So at a bigger price, I'm going to use her as well. But those two would be more C-types for me.
Yeah, I have no problem with either of those horses. They're both shown close up on the pace projector, and I don't think this is a race where you want to be coming from too far back in the pack. I know I was highlighting Eddie's New Dream. I'm not really sure where she'll be slotted in from a trip standpoint on the turn back and distance. Clearly, she's shown a little farther back on the pace projector. Hopefully, they can keep her a little bit closer. But yeah, I think both of the horses you mentioned are interesting, Nardini and Nice Ice. It's an interesting Nice Ice listed at 30-1 in the morning line. I know that Ruben Alvarado has 2 horses in this race, and I guess people are just going to naturally gravitate towards California Kook for the reason that John Velasquez, who's winning at 37% right now at Santa Anita, is listed on board that horse. But I mean, Umberto Rispoli, a good turf rider in his own right, and I don't think that's some consolation prize with Nice Ice. I don't think she can be 30-1 in this race because she looks more appealing than that, but I don't see why she can't be in the 12 to 15-1 range. And there are plenty of horses in that price range that I think are pretty interesting and could get in the mix, because while Warren Showtime and Legs Galore are clearly the ones to beat and have the best form overall, it's not like they've got some huge edge over this field where they're the only ones that deserve to take money. So this is one of the races in this sequence where I feel like you might be able to spread a little bit and catch a better price. Move on to race 9. This is the California Cup Sprint, going 6 furlongs on the main track. And Craig, I think when you handicap this race, you just have to basically first develop an opinion about Brickyard Ride, the expected favorite. This horse is just blazingly fast in the early going. They've tried some tougher spots with him recently, or when he was last seen over the summer, but he's always dangerous in these California bred races. It's just a question of what do we get from him off the layoff? If we see the good version of Brickyard Ride, personally, I don't think they can beat him.
Yeah, he was definitely an enigma for me in this race because he's going to be on a clear lead. Well, you think he is based on the pace projector, but there's a couple horses in here who challenged him when they faced him back in May at Santa Anita, and he threw in the towel. And I'd argue he's been in pretty terrible form. His last, ever since that Kona Gold where he was dusted by Cezanne, the Bob Baffert trainee, who hasn't been seen since, but he is on the work tab, so I guess he's coming back soon. But outside of that, he's lost 3 of his 4 races. One win was when he was just gifted a lead in pace that I didn't even know he was capable of going that slow. I doubt that would happen here, so I'm really not sure what to do with him. Now, I have to use him. There's no way I'm going to watch him coast wire to wire and be knocked out because of it, but it would be hard for me to anchor my ticket around him. So I'm going to look for some others and use him more as a backup type, because I just don't trust the form. When you look through his PPs, he's never really had much of a layoff. This is really the first one of his career, so I'm just not sure what to expect from him. He's admittedly been facing way, way better horses than this, so again, I won't be shocked if he wins, but there was a horse who really interested me in here at somewhat of a price, and that's the 6-horse Let's Get Lucky. He's a horse who is improving. He's a newly turned 4-year-old, so I think he still has some room to grow. And he ran a nice 119 TimeformUS speed figure in a race that has come back pretty solid. The horses out of it have run well. I don't think there's anything phony about the figure, and he's got some speed. I don't think he's going to let Brickyard Ride get away too much, so I would actually prefer him, especially playing vertical wet bets. In the horizontals, like I said, I would still use Brickyard Ride, but I'm going to use Let's Get Lucky for sure, probably more heavily. A couple other horses, it's kind of hard for me to just completely dismiss them. Horses like Positivity, Principe Carlo, and Colt Fiction, they're all in good form. They're all capable of winning this. So this is the kind of race where I'm going to spread a little bit more and look for a price.
Yeah, I was not looking to get too creative here. I'm going to take the opposite argument with Brickyard Ride. You could say he's been nowhere at the end, or he's been off the board in 3 of his last 4 starts. I mean, he actually ran very well too back in that Bing Crosby when, they went a blazing pace on the front end. He did his usual act, rocketing out of the gate to get a clear early lead, but he had to work very hard to do it. That was a race that was falling apart at the end. He was facing horses like Dr. Shivel and CZ Rocket, and it's not like he gave up. He only lost by a length and a half after going so fast. He earned a 118 TimeformUS speed figure, which matches his prior number when he got gifted that pace situation. So in some ways, it's even a more impressive effort than that race that he won back in June at Santa Anita. And last time out, when he ran so poorly, going 7 in the Pat O'Brien, he broke through the starting gate before that race and just seemed totally discombobulated. So I don't want to be too hard on him for that race. And obviously, there was a layoff after that. I was reading our colleague Brad Free's race preview for this on DRF.com, and his trainer, Craig Lewis, sounds very confident that this horse is going to show up, welcoming the challenges. So I like to hear that from a barn, and I just think Brickyard Ride, if he shows up with his good effort, they're not going to beat him. So I did not have a strong enough opinion against him or for anybody else that I wanted to take a big stand against him in this multi-race sequence, because if I was going to go against this horse, I don't know. It just seems like a race where you'd have to spread quite a bit, and I don't really want to do that. There's nobody else that I can really latch onto that, is the one horse that I want to use as the backup. Positivity has solid form. He's obviously been keeping good company recently. I thought of the horses that are coming out of that Cary Grant Stakes at the end of November at Del Mar, Positivity is the one that I want the most. I thought he was the most game of those coming down the stretch, really battling back with a lot of grit towards the inside after it looked like he might get nothing at the top of the stretch. So he's just in really good form right now for Doug O'Neill, but he's got Flavien Prat taking over the reins. It feels like he's going to take a lot of money as the main alternative. So I don't know. I didn't love him. I just think that Brickyard Ride is a more naturally talented horse. And the others, I just had trouble latching onto. I'm not going to argue with your price horse. Let's Get Lucky, Craig. I just wonder what kind of trip horses like him are going to get when they do their best running, kind of right on top of the pace. And when you're facing a horse like Brickyard Ride, who wants to open up a length or two on the field, it just takes all of those pressers off the bridle and almost it takes them out of their preferred trip. So I worry about horses like him and some others that like to get that pressing trip. A horse like Brickyard Ride can really be the enemy of those types. So if he's 12-1, then have at it. Once again, I'm not going to talk you off a price horse. I don't know. I found myself I kept going back to the favorite here. One other horse that I want to mention before we move on, Craig, that's just kind of an odd horse in this race, is the number 5 Loudmouth, claimed by John Sadler and Ronus Racing for $80,000. Seems like kind of a weird claim for these connections in particular, because he had been just going off form recently and he ran poorly last time, but we've seen these connections turn horses around in the past. I just wonder if this one's too far gone.
Yeah, that was my thinking exactly. I saw the John Sadler claim and was a little leery, and they're bringing him right back. He just ran on New Year's Eve, so just about a 2-week turnaround for him. But the recent form's been so poor, it's just hard for me to latch on to him based purely on the connections. He's cutting back in distance. Most of his races his recent races have been at longer, mile, 7 furlongs. This last one was at 6, but he did no running whatsoever. So, yeah, if he beats me, he beats me. That would just be a little bit too much of a form change for me.
Well, let's close out this sequence, whichever one you're playing, the pick 6, pick 5, pick 4. They all end in race 10, the final race of the day at Santa Anita, the California Cup Oaks, going 1 mile on the turf course for the California-bred 3-year-old fillies. We've got a large field of 12 signed on. The favorite, though, Craig, is likely to be the number 7, Professor's Pride, one of the few horses who's switching from dirt to turf, and this is one who's never been on the turf, and I think that you can go back to that old adage, never take a horse at a short price trying something new for the first time. And that definitely applies to Professor's Pride, who is just a big question mark getting on the turf.
Yeah, this race is just one that's a real head scratcher. I mean, there's a big field of 12. The pace projector says it's going to be a fast pace. And I think that's largely, well, it's because of the field size and the fact we have so many horses that have run last on dirt moving the turf. So I don't know how people like to handle these kind of races. There's little turf for them to go on. Some people will like the spread. Me personally, these are the kind of races where I'm just going to narrow it down to a couple horses. I hate spreading in races like this. I'd rather take my shot and try to get it right and hope I use it and spread in some other legs. So I narrowed this one down to 2 horses. The first one is Vivacious Vanessa. I know when you look at her speed figure, it looks a little bit light in here, but I really do think that she is a replay to go back and watch. The race came on October 16th, 2 back. She's since run on dirt, but I'm not paying any attention to that race. And the trip was something that day. She didn't break well. She dropped back. She was steadied in a few times, and it was just really impressive visually, the way she was able to maneuver through traffic. She didn't give up. It's not normally the kind of race you see from a 2-year-old filly. So I'm going to lean on her pretty heavily, even though she only ran that 75 speed figure. I think as a now turned 3-year-old, I think easily this horse can run in the 90s, and that would be one that could win this race. She should get plenty of pace. Not even sure she needs it. I don't know that she has to be as far back as she was the first time, but I can't resist this horse watching the replay. The other horse I'm going to consider is, and this is strictly because of the connections, there's no way I'm going to be knocked out if I'm alive to this last leg, by a Phil D'Amato trained in Flavian Prat ridden horse. Only 7-2 on the morning line for Rose Dawson, but she was pretty impressive first time out. The breeding doesn't say much for turf as far as I was able to decipher, but I've learned to just trust Phil D'Amato in these spots. He wins a lot of races like this, so that's it for me. I'm leaning on those 2.
Well, I have no argument with either of those horses, Craig. I made positive cases for both of them as well. Like you, I did not love the morning line price on Rose Dawson, another one of those situations where I feel like Flavian Prat is just going to pull in a lot of money. But you can't argue with the turf pedigree. She's a full sister to a multiple turf winner. Grayson gets turf horses. I liked the debut as you did. She looked like she had a really powerful stride coming home through the stretch. So I like Rose Dawson. I like Vivacious Vanessa. For all the reasons that you mentioned, I have nothing to add to your analysis. I'm just going to throw one more horse into the mix because, as I kind of alluded to at the start, Professor's Pride, not the kind of horse I want to play in this race. I would just leave her out completely. If she beats me, she beats me. I'm happy to go without the favorite in this finale, but there's one more horse at a price that I want to make a case for, and that's the number 6, Eleuthera. She comes into this race as a maiden, but I wouldn't hold that against her too much because she's run pretty well in both of her turf races. Her debut at Del Mar, I know she was beaten 4 lengths by today's rival Dendera, but if you go back and watch that race, they just crawled up front, a slow pace. She was never in position to be competitive there, but she was just flying through the stretch once Mario Gutierrez steered her out into the clear. And she was no match for the winner, but she showed a lot of turf inclination that day. They put her on the dirt once, but they brought her back to turf last time. And it should be noted, she was in an open company maiden race last month at Santa Anita on the turf, and she got a 90 TimeformUS speed figure. I mean, that's a higher turf speed figure than I think anybody else has earned in this race. Not that it's a race that's overflowing with turf form, but that's the kind of number that could win this race. And I thought she ran okay that day. I mean, she secured the lead going into the first turn. There was a horse that made this big premature move from last to first that kind of overtook her and ended up going on to win the race. But I thought Eleuthera, stayed on pretty gamely at the end. And if you look through that field, that number is totally legitimate. I mean, that's the kind of field that produces horses that can run speed figures in the 80s and 90s on the TimeformUS scale. And I just think based on the connections, Ben Cecil and Mario Gutierrez, this is a horse that's not going to take that much money in this race. And to me, her form suggests that she's certainly good enough to be a major player in here. So I don't know if we're going to get 15-1, but she's the kind of horse I would definitely want to have on most of my tickets in the last leg of the sequence.
Yeah, good point about her. And worth noting, if you look at her speed figure, she only ran a 70 first time out, jumped up to that 90. And obviously some was probably due to the pace and trip that she only ran a 70. But just something to keep in mind when you're looking at these young horses, this is a newly turned 3-year-old. These kind of jumps are not unexpected. I think you would do yourselves a lot of favors to our listeners when you anticipate these kind of jump ups from the younger horses. As a guy who makes speed figures for a living, I would never just bet the top speed figure horses in these types. You're always looking for these young horses to improve. Some are getting better, some are not, and try to dig into that. And Eleuthera certainly points to some of those signs as one that has more in the tank.
Well, that's a look at this late group of sequences at Santa Anita. We can do a quick review, Craig. I think we differ in a few spots. I'm going to be looking to lean on Brickyard Ride somewhat reluctantly in the 9th race, but just one where it's either a situation where I go with the favorite or I use the favorite and have a lot of backups, and I'd rather just lean on the favorite in that situation and try to get some prices home in surrounding legs. The prices that I'm most interested in would be in that 8th race. I like Eddie's New Dream, the number 11. It's a horse that I would use as an A in a sequence like this, maybe along with some of the logicals like Legs Galore and Warren Showtime. And in this last leg we just talked about, I would also make Eleuthera an A. I think that she's a major player in this race, and I would use her along with the two that Craig mentioned, Vivacious Vanessa and Rose Dawson. But things to me, Craig, looked a little bit more logical early on. I was not making a case for a lot of price horse through those first 3 legs, so hoping to get more creative maybe in the 8th race and the 10th race.
Yeah, for me, this is one where I'm going to kind of spread in some races and use some price horses, knowing they're probably not my top picks. I'm going to lean on Warren Showtime in that 6th race, but also use Lesser Camino del Paraiso as the logical alternative. And then in the allowance race, I'm definitely going to use a price horse in Alpine Thunder, but use a couple others that we mentioned in there, including Scary Fast Smile, who looks dangerous and could go wire to wire. I mentioned Warren Showtime. I think I got out of order here for a little bit. But I'm going to lean on him. I'm going to spread a little more in the sprint race and then narrow it down in that last race, using just the 2 horses. You did make a nice case for the 6th horse in there, but I'm going to stick to my guns and stay with Vivacious Vanessa and Rose Dawson, because it's a race where I just want to keep things pretty narrow and hope to be alive spreading in the earlier legs.
Well, that's a look at Santa Anita's card on Saturday. Hopefully we give out some good opinions, see how things shake out, how the track is playing, especially on the dirt course early in the day, if there are any biases popping up. We've seen some of that at Santa Anita recently, so you can get a sense of things in the first 4 races. Maybe that'll inform your play later on when these sequences begin in race 5 or 6. But definitely some interesting ways to go. Some relatively large fields for California at this time of year. So a good card that Santa Anita has put together on Saturday. We'll obviously recap these things when we do the TimeformUS Pacecast next week, as we will races from all around the country. We've got some things going on at Gulfstream, Craig. There are some good races for the Florida breds there on Saturday. There's also a really intriguing allowance race at Gulfstream on Saturday with some very talented horses like Olympiad coming out of the Cigar Mile. I know that's a horse that I'm very interested in to maybe have a big 4-year-old season, so check him out when he runs at Gulfstream. But we'll take a look at all the races from this weekend to recap on the Pacecast next week. Craig, always fun to talk about these races with you from the handicapping perspective. Remember that you can listen to these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch the TimeformUS Pacecast next Tuesday.